Dr. Richard Hayes walked through the halls of Metropolitan General Hospital like he owned the place. In many ways, he did. For 15 years, he had been one of the most respected doctors in the building. His white coat was always crisp and clean. His shoes were polished to a shine. Everything about him screamed success. The hospital was huge, with tall glass windows and modern equipment. It stood in the center of the city like a tower of hope. People came from all over the state to get treatment there. They trusted the doctors. They believed in the hospital's good name. And Dr. Hayes was a big part of that name. He had the kind of background that made people impressed. He went to one of the best medical schools in the country. The kind of school that only accepted the smartest students. The kind of school that cost more money than most people made in 5 years. He graduated at the top of his class. His professors said he was brilliant. His test scores were perfect. He could memorize anything. He could solve the hardest medical problems like they were simple puzzles. After medical school, he did his training at another famous hospital. Then he published papers in medical journals. Other doctors read his work and quoted him in their own research. He gave speeches at conferences. He sat on important committees. By the time he was 40, he was the head of the internal medicine department at Metropolitan General. That meant he was in charge of dozens of other doctors. He decided who got hired. He decided who got promoted. He had power. The younger doctors looked up to him. When he walked into a room, they stood a little straighter. When he asked a question, they rushed to answer. They wanted to impress him. They wanted him to notice their hard work. Getting praise from Dr. Hayes meant something. It could help their careers. It could open doors. The hospital administrators loved him too. He brought prestige to Metropolitan General. When people asked where the best internal medicine department was, his name came up. When medical students wanted to do their training, they asked to work under him. The hospital's reputation grew because of doctors like him. So when there were occasional complaints, the administrators did not pay much attention. Some nurses had mentioned things over the years. They said Dr. Hayes could be cold. They said he did not always listen to patients. They said he sometimes seemed annoyed when people asked too many questions. But the complaints were vague. Nothing specific. Nothing that could be proven. And besides, he was such a good doctor. Surely his medical skills made up for a less than warm personality. That is what the administrators told themselves. Dr. Hayes had a corner office on the 5th floor. It had a view of the city skyline. There were diplomas on the walls in expensive frames. His desk was made of dark wood and was always perfectly organized. He kept medical journals stacked neatly on one side. His computer was new and fast. Everything in his office was first class, just like his reputation. He arrived at the hospital every morning at 7 o'clock sharp. He drank black coffee from a paper cup. He checked his emails first thing. Then he reviewed the patient charts for the day. He liked to know everything before he saw patients. He did not like surprises. He did not like when things did not go according to his plan. Most days followed the same routine. He would do morning rounds with the residents and interns. These were young doctors still learning. They followed him from room to room, listening as he explained diagnoses and treatments. He would ask them questions to test their knowledge. He would point out things they missed. He was teaching them to be better doctors. At least that is what it looked like from the outside. After rounds, he would see patients in the clinic. He would read test results. He would write prescriptions. He would make phone calls to specialists. He would attend meetings with other department heads. He was busy from morning until evening. He rarely took breaks. He rarely stopped to chat with colleagues. He was all business all the time. His colleagues had mixed feelings about him. Some truly admired him. They thought he was dedicated and brilliant. They respected his knowledge and his work ethic. Others were not so sure. They found him difficult to work with. He did not take suggestions well. He did not like being questioned. If someone disagreed with him, he would shut them down quickly. He made it clear that his way was the right way, but no one could deny his credentials. No one could say he was not qualified. On paper, he was perfect. His medical license was spotless. He had never been sued. He had never been formally reprimanded. There was nothing in his official record that would raise any red flags. He looked like the model of what a successful doctor should be. Beneath the surface, though, something else was lurking. Dr. Hayes had prejudices. He had beliefs about people based on the color of their skin. He had grown up in a certain kind of family. in a certain kind of neighborhood, and those experiences had shaped how he saw the world. He believed some people were better than others. He believed some people deserved better treatment than others. And he let those beliefs influence how he practiced medicine. It was subtle at first, the way he would spend less time with certain patients, the way he would not quite believe them when they described their pain, the way he would order fewer tests or offer weaker pain medication. He told himself he was just being practical. He told himself he was using his best medical judgment. But deep down, his decisions were colored by racism. The nurses noticed patterns. They saw that he treated different patients differently, but it was hard to prove. It was hard to point to one specific moment and say, that was wrong. It was a pattern that built up over time. A pattern of small choices and small comments and small actions that added up to something bigger and uglier. No one wanted to believe it. Dr. Hayes was too successful, too respected, too important to the hospital. Surely there was some other explanation. Surely they were just imagining things. And so the pattern continued, year after year, hidden behind his impressive resume and his polished appearance. He had built his career carefully. He had climbed the ladder step by step. He had everything a doctor could want: respect, money, power, and prestige. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his position protected him. He thought he could continue forever, making life and death decisions while letting his prejudices guide his hand. But pride comes before a fall, and Dr. Hayes was about to discover that no amount of credentials could protect him from the consequences of his own hatred. His carefully built reputation was about to come crashing down, and it would happen faster than anyone could imagine. The halls he walked with such confidence would soon feel very different. The colleagues who nodded respectfully would soon look at him with disgust. Everything was about to change, and he had no idea it was coming. Angela Thompson sat in the emergency room waiting area, hunched over in her chair. The pain in her stomach was getting worse. It felt like someone was stabbing her from the inside. She had tried to tough it out at home, but she could not take it anymore. She needed help, and she needed it now. She was 42 years old and had always been healthy. She worked as a teacher at an elementary school. She loved her job. She loved the kids. She had a son in college and a daughter in high school. She was the kind of person who always put others first. She volunteered at her church on weekends. She helped her elderly neighbors with their groceries. She was kind and caring and strong. But for the past few months, something had been wrong. It started with a dull ache in her abdomen. She thought maybe it was just stress from work. Teaching was not easy, especially with all the new requirements and paperwork. She thought maybe she just needed to rest more. But the pain did not go away. It got worse. She went to her regular doctor. He barely looked at her. He asked a few quick questions and then said it was probably just indigestion. He told her to take over-the-counter medicine and watch what she ate. She tried that, but nothing changed. The pain kept growing. She went back to the doctor. This time a different one. The new doctor seemed annoyed that she was there again. He asked if she was sure she was not just overreacting. He asked if maybe she was just stressed. He suggested she try exercising more and eating less. Angela felt humiliated. She was not making this up. The pain was real. But the doctor did not seem to believe her. She tried a third doctor. This one at least ordered some basic tests. Blood work came back mostly normal. The doctor said there was nothing seriously wrong. Maybe it was irritable bowel syndrome, he suggested. Maybe it was anxiety. He wrote her a prescription for antacids and sent her home. But Angela knew her body. She knew something was really wrong. The pain was not in her head. It was real, and it was getting worse every day. She started having trouble sleeping. She could not eat much because her stomach hurt so badly. She was losing weight. Her family was worried about her. At work, she tried to hide how bad she felt. She did not want to worry the kids or the other teachers. She would smile and teach her lessons, but during her lunch break, she would sit at her desk with her hand pressed against her stomach, trying to breathe through the pain. Her coworkers noticed she was not herself. They asked if she was okay. She always said she was fine. Then one night, the pain became unbearable. She was at home making dinner when suddenly it felt like fire spreading through her abdomen. She dropped the spoon she was holding. She could not stand up straight. Her daughter found her bent over the kitchen counter, tears running down her face. Her daughter called 911 right away. The ambulance came within minutes. The paramedics asked her questions about her symptoms. They took her vital signs. Her blood pressure was elevated. Her heart was racing. They got her on a stretcher and rushed her to Metropolitan General Hospital. In the emergency room, the pain was so bad that Angela could barely speak. A nurse came and asked her the same questions the paramedics had asked. What kind of pain was it? Where exactly did it hurt? When did it start? Angela tried to explain everything, but the nurse seemed rushed. She wrote notes quickly and then moved on to another patient. Angela waited and waited. The emergency room was busy and loud. People were coughing and crying and calling out for help. Doctors and nurses rushed past. No one seemed to have time to really listen. Angela sat in her hospital gown, shivering under a thin blanket, wondering when someone would help her. Finally, after 3 hours, a doctor came to see her. It was not Dr. Hayes yet. It was a younger emergency room doctor. He examined her quickly, pressing on her abdomen. She cried out when he touched the right side. He ordered some tests. Blood work again, a CT scan. He said they needed to rule out appendicitis, more waiting. Angela was moved to a room to wait for the scan. The pain was so bad now that she could not think straight. She tried calling her daughter to let her know what was happening, but she could barely hold the phone. A nurse came and gave her some pain medication through an IV. It helped a little, but not much. The CT scan took forever. She had to drink a nasty liquid and wait for it to go through her system. Then she had to lie perfectly still in the machine while it took pictures of her insides. Every breath hurt. Every movement was agony. After the scan, she was taken back to a room. More waiting. She dozed off a few times from exhaustion and the pain medication, but she kept waking up because of the pain. Hours passed. She did not know what was happening or when she would see a doctor again. Finally, the next morning, she was told she was being admitted to the hospital. They were assigning her to the internal medicine team for further evaluation. The CT scan showed some concerning findings, but they were not clear enough for a definitive diagnosis. She needed more tests and monitoring. That is when Dr. Hayes entered the picture. He was assigned to her case because he was on service that week. When he first came into her room, Angela felt a small sense of relief. Finally, a senior doctor who might be able to figure out what was wrong with her. Finally, someone who would take her seriously. But the feeling did not last long. Dr. Hayes barely looked at her when he walked in. He stood near the door with her chart in his hand, scanning it quickly. He did not introduce himself properly. He did not ask how she was feeling. He just started asking questions in a flat, bored tone. When Angela tried to explain how long she had been in pain and how many doctors she had seen, Dr. Hayes interrupted her. He said he just needed the facts, not a long story. Angela felt herself shrink a little. She tried to be more concise, but the pain made it hard to organize her thoughts. She wanted him to understand how serious this was. Dr. Hayes did a quick physical exam. His touch was rough and impersonal. When Angela flinched from the pain, he made a note on his tablet but did not say anything comforting. He did not look her in the eye. He seemed eager to leave the room as quickly as possible. He asked her if she took any medications. She told him about the antacids the previous doctor had prescribed. He asked if she used any recreational drugs. The question caught Angela off guard. She said no, of course not. He asked again, in a different way, as if he did not believe her. She said no more firmly. She felt insulted but did not want to make him angry. She needed his help. Dr. Hayes said he would review her test results and come back later. He left without really explaining anything. No treatment plan, no reassurance, just a quick visit, and then he was gone. Angela felt more worried than before. Something about the way he had looked at her, or rather the way he had not looked at her, made her uneasy. She called her daughter and told her about the new doctor. Her daughter asked if she liked him. Angela paused. She did not know how to answer. She said she hoped he would figure out what was wrong. She said she just wanted to feel better and go home, but deep down Angela had a bad feeling. She had experienced this kind of treatment before. The dismissiveness, the lack of eye contact, the assumption that she was exaggerating or lying. She had hoped that at a big, respected hospital like Metropolitan General, things would be different. She had hoped that a senior doctor with all his training and experience would treat her with respect and care. She was wrong. Dr. Hayes had already made up his mind about her. He had looked at her chart, seen her demographics, and decided she was not worth his full attention. He had prejudged her before even meeting her, and that prejudice would almost cost Angela her life. The next morning started like any other at Metropolitan General Hospital. The sun was just coming up, casting long shadows through the hallways. Nurses were finishing their night shifts. Doctors were arriving with coffee in their hands. The hospital was coming to life. Dr. Hayes arrived at 7 o'clock, just like always. He had his team of residents and interns waiting for him. There were 6 of them that morning. Young doctors, fresh out of medical school or in the middle of their training. They stood in a small group near the nurses' station, holding their tablets and notebooks. They looked tired. Most of them had been at the hospital since the day before, working long shifts. Morning rounds were a daily ritual. Dr. Hayes would lead his team from room to room, discussing each patient's case. It was supposed to be educational. The young doctors were supposed to learn from him. He would explain diagnoses, ask them questions, and test their knowledge. It was how medical training worked. Learn by doing. Learn by watching the senior doctors. Dr. Keisha Morrison was one of the residents on the team that morning. She was in her 3rd year of residency, smart and hardworking. She had wanted to be a doctor since she was a little girl. She had worked 2 jobs to pay for college. She had studied late into the night to ace her medical school exams. She was proud of how far she had come. She loved medicine. She loved helping people. But working with Dr. Hayes was difficult. She had been on his service for 2 weeks now, and something about him made her uncomfortable. He was brilliant, no doubt about that. His medical knowledge was impressive. But there was a coldness to him, an arrogance. He spoke down to the residents sometimes, making them feel stupid when they did not know an answer right away. The team gathered around Dr. Hayes as he pulled up the patient list on his tablet. There were 12 patients to see that morning. He went through them quickly, deciding which ones needed the most attention. When he got to Angela Thompson's name, he paused. The group started walking down the hallway toward Angela's room. Their shoes made soft squeaking sounds on the polished floor. The hospital was quiet at this early hour. Most patients were still sleeping. The team walked in a cluster with Dr. Hayes in the lead. As they approached Angela's room, Dr. Hayes stopped about 10 feet from her door. The young doctors gathered around him, ready to learn about the case. This was normal. Before entering a patient's room, the team would often discuss the case in the hallway first. Review the symptoms. Talk about the treatment plan. Then go in to examine the patient. But what happened next was not normal. Not even close. Dr. Hayes looked at Angela's chart on his tablet and shook his head. He had a smirk on his face. One of the interns, a young man fresh out of medical school, asked what the diagnosis was. Dr. Hayes's smirk grew wider. "This one," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "claims she has been in terrible pain for months." He dragged out the word terrible in a mocking way. Some of the residents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dr. Morrison felt her stomach tighten. Something was wrong. This was not how you talked about a patient, Dr. Hayes continued. She has been to multiple doctors, apparently. No one can find anything wrong with her, but she insists, absolutely insists, that she is dying. He rolled his eyes as he said it. One of the interns, trying to be helpful, asked if they had ruled out all the serious conditions. Dr. Hayes waved his hand dismissively. The CT scan shows some minor inflammation. Nothing that explains the level of drama we are dealing with here. Then he did something that made Dr. Morrison's blood run cold. He changed his voice, putting on what was clearly meant to be an impression. He made his voice higher and added an exaggerated accent. "Oh, doctor, the pain is so bad I can't take it no more. I need something for this pain." 2 of the residents laughed nervously. The others stood frozen, not sure how to react. Dr. Morrison felt sick. This was wrong. This was so wrong, but Dr. Hayes was not done. He was on a roll now, enjoying his own performance. "You know the type," he said, looking at his team with a knowing expression. "Always looking for pain meds. Always exaggerating. You have to learn to tell the difference between real medical emergencies and people who just want attention." Dr. Morrison found her voice. "Sir, what if she really is in serious pain? The inflammation on the scan." Dr. Hayes cut her off. "Morrison, you will learn with experience. Some patients, especially certain demographics, have a tendency to overstate their symptoms. It is not racism, it is just medical reality. Their pain tolerance is different. They present differently." The words hung in the air like poison. Dr. Morrison could not believe what she was hearing. He was actually saying this, out loud. in front of everyone, and he was not even trying to hide it. Another resident, trying to defend Dr. Hayes, or maybe just trying to make sense of what was happening, asked if there were studies that showed different pain tolerances in different populations. Dr. Hayes nodded eagerly, as if he was glad someone was paying attention. Absolutely, he said. There is literature on this. Of course, you have to be careful how you say it these days. Everyone is so sensitive, but between us as medical professionals, we can acknowledge these differences. It helps us make better clinical judgments. Dr. Morrison wanted to scream. There was no good scientific evidence for what he was saying. This was racism dressed up in medical language. This was dangerous. This was the kind of thinking that led to black patients getting inadequate pain treatment. The kind of thinking that led to worse medical outcomes for minorities. She had read about it in medical school. She had seen the statistics, and now she was watching it happen right in front of her. Dr. Hayes was still talking. He made another cruel imitation of Angela's voice, this time mimicking how she had described her symptoms during his examination. He made her sound ignorant and overly emotional. He suggested that she was probably just constipated or having menstrual cramps, even though Angela was describing symptoms that sounded much more serious. I will order some basic pain medication, he said, but nothing strong. Last thing we need is to feed into drug-seeking behavior. We will monitor her for another day, and if nothing changes, we will send her home with instructions to follow up with her primary care doctor. One of the braver interns asked, "What about the inflammation on the scan? Should we do more imaging?" Dr. Hayes sighed as if the question was exhausting. Look, if we ordered every test for every patient who came in claiming to be in pain, we would go bankrupt. You have to learn to prioritize. Use your clinical judgment. And part of that judgment is recognizing when someone is being overly dramatic. What Dr. Hayes did not know was that Angela's door was not completely closed. There was a gap of about 3 inches. She had asked the nurse the night before to leave it open a crack because she felt claustrophobic with it fully shut. The hallway sounds helped her feel less alone. Angela was awake. She had heard everything. Every mocking word, every cruel imitation, every dismissive comment. She lay in her hospital bed, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed against her mouth to keep from making a sound. The pain in her abdomen was excruciating, but somehow the pain of what she had just heard was even worse. She had trusted this hospital. She had trusted this doctor. She had thought that finally, someone with real expertise would help her. Instead, he was mocking her. He was making assumptions about her based on nothing but his prejudice. He was not taking her seriously. And from what she could tell, he was teaching young doctors to do the same thing. Outside in the hallway, Dr. Hayes finally wrapped up his little performance. "All right," he said, "let's go see her. Try to keep a straight face." He actually laughed at his own joke. The team followed him toward the door. Dr. Morrison walked at the back of the group, her mind racing. She felt ashamed for not speaking up more forcefully. She felt angry at Dr. Hayes. She felt scared for Angela Thompson. And she felt torn about what to do next. When they entered the room, Angela quickly wiped her eyes. She tried to compose herself. Dr. Hayes did not seem to notice that she had been crying. He launched into a quick explanation of the plan, his voice now professional and neutral, as if he had not just been mocking her in the hallway seconds before. Angela said nothing. What could she say? This man had power over her care. If she confronted him, would he make things worse? Would he discharge her without figuring out what was really wrong? She felt trapped and terrified. The team left her room after just a few minutes. As they walked away, Dr. Morrison glanced back. She saw Angela's face, and in that moment their eyes met. Angela's expression was one of pure despair. And Dr. Morrison knew she had to do something. Dr. Keisha Morrison could not focus on the rest of her rounds. As Dr. Hayes continued from room to room, explaining cases and asking questions, her mind kept going back to what had happened outside Angela Thompson's door. The mocking voice, the racist assumptions, the casual cruelty. She felt like she had witnessed something terrible, and she could not just pretend it had not happened. The other residents and interns seemed uncomfortable too. No one was talking much. Usually during rounds they would ask questions and discuss the cases, but now there was an awkward silence. Everyone was just following Dr. Hayes, taking notes and trying to avoid eye contact with each other. When rounds finally ended around 10 in the morning, the team scattered. Some went to check on their assigned patients. Others headed to the cafeteria for a quick breakfast. Dr. Morrison went straight to an empty conference room and closed the door. She needed to think. She sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. She had been in medicine long enough to know that what she had witnessed was not just unprofessional, it was dangerous. Dr. Hayes had let his prejudice cloud his medical judgment. He had decided Angela was not worth taking seriously before he had even properly examined her. And worse, he was teaching young doctors to think the same way. Dr. Morrison thought about her own experiences. She was a black woman in medicine. She had faced discrimination throughout her career. In college, a professor had suggested she might be happier in nursing instead of medicine. In medical school, she had been mistaken for a janitor by a patient. During her residency, she had watched white colleagues with worse grades get better opportunities. She had learned to work twice as hard to get half the respect. But she had also learned something else. She had learned that silence was dangerous. When good people stayed quiet, bad things continued to happen. She thought about all the patients like Angela, who had been dismissed and mistreated because of the color of their skin. She thought about the studies she had read about racial disparities in healthcare. Black patients received less pain medication. They were less likely to be referred to specialists. They had worse outcomes for treatable conditions, and doctors like Dr. Hayes were a big part of the problem. She pulled out her phone and opened her work email. Then she paused. What exactly was she going to do? Report Dr. Hayes to who? He was the head of the department. He had power and connections. She was just a resident. What if no one believed her? What if this hurt her career? She had worked so hard to get where she was. Did she really want to risk everything? Then she remembered Angela's face. The tears. The despair. The look of someone who had been betrayed by the very system that was supposed to help her. Dr. Morrison knew she could not stay silent. Not this time. She remembered something from her training. The hospital had a system for recording teaching rounds. It was meant to be a tool for education. Young doctors could review the recordings later to study. The cameras were small and discreet, mounted in the hallways to capture the teaching discussions. She had almost forgotten about them because they were just part of the background. Dr. Morrison quickly walked to the IT department on the second floor. She explained to the technician that she needed to review a teaching session from that morning for educational purposes. It was not an unusual request. Residents reviewed recordings all the time to study cases they had seen. The technician pulled up the footage and gave her access to download the file. Dr. Morrison went back to the conference room and watched it on her laptop. Her hands shook as she pressed play. There it was, everything. Dr. Hayes' mocking voice, his racist impression, his dismissive comments, the uncomfortable reactions of the other residents. It was all captured in clear video with perfect audio. She watched it 3 times, feeling more horrified each time. This was not ambiguous. This was not something that could be explained away or justified. This was clear evidence of racist behavior from a senior physician, and it had happened while discussing a patient who was currently under his care. Dr. Morrison spent the rest of the day agonizing over what to do. She saw patients. She wrote notes. She attended a lecture, but her mind was elsewhere. By the evening, she had made her decision. She had to report this, not just to one person, but to everyone who needed to know. She stayed late at the hospital that night, long after her shift ended. She sat in the conference room and carefully wrote an email. She explained what had happened that morning. She described the incident in detail. She attached the video file. Then she addressed the email to 3 recipients: the Hospital Ethics Committee, the Chief Medical Officer, and the State Medical Board. Her finger hovered over the send button for a full minute. Once she pressed it, there would be no going back. This would change everything. Dr. Hayes would know someone had reported him. He might figure out it was her. Her life would get complicated. But she thought of Angela again. She thought of all the other patients who had been mistreated. She thought of the kind of doctor she wanted to be. She pressed send. Dr. Morrison did not sleep that night. She kept checking her phone, expecting angry calls or messages, but nothing came. The next morning, she went to the hospital exhausted and anxious. She avoided Dr. Hayes as much as possible. She threw herself into her work, trying to act normal, but things were happening behind the scenes. The email had landed like a bomb in several important inboxes. The Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Patricia Chen, opened it first thing in the morning. She watched the video twice, her face growing more serious with each viewing. Then she forwarded it to the hospital president and the legal team. By noon, an emergency meeting had been called. Meanwhile, someone on the ethics committee forwarded the video to a colleague. That colleague forwarded it to another doctor. By the afternoon, the video was circulating among the hospital staff. People were watching it on their phones in break rooms. Nurses were sharing it. Other residents were sending it to their friends. The hospital's rumor mill was churning at full speed. The response was swift and overwhelming. Nurses who had worked with Dr. Hayes for years started coming forward with their own stories. One nurse remembered how he had ignored her concerns about a black patient's blood pressure, saying the patient was probably just anxious. Another nurse recalled him making dismissive comments about Hispanic patients not understanding their medication instructions. A third nurse described how he always seemed to spend less time with patients of color. Doctors started speaking up too. Some admitted they had witnessed similar behavior, but had been afraid to say anything. Others shared stories of complaints from patients that had been swept under the rug. The pattern was undeniable. This was not an isolated incident. This was how Dr. Hayes had been practicing medicine for years. The hospital's social media team started getting notifications. Former patients were posting about their experiences with Dr. Hayes. One woman wrote about how he had dismissed her pain during pregnancy, leading to complications. A man described how Dr. Hayes had accused him of faking symptoms to get disability benefits. The stories kept coming, dozens of them, each one more disturbing than the last. The local news picked up the story by the second day. A reporter had a source inside the hospital who leaked the video. By that evening, it was on the news. The anchor introduced it with a serious expression. A respected doctor at Metropolitan General Hospital is under investigation after video emerged showing him making racist comments about a patient. The video went viral. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times. People were outraged. Medical organizations issued statements condemning the behavior. Civil rights groups called for Dr. Hayes to lose his license. The hospital's phone lines were jammed with calls from angry community members. Dr. Hayes tried to do damage control. He released a statement saying his comments had been taken out of context. He said he had dedicated his life to helping all patients regardless of race. He said he was sorry if anyone was offended. But the apology fell flat. People were not buying it. The video was too clear. His words were too damning. Inside the hospital, the mood was tense. Doctors and nurses were divided. Some defended Dr. Hayes, saying he was a good doctor who had made one mistake. Others were disgusted and wanted him fired immediately. The administration was scrambling to figure out how to handle the crisis. Dr. Morrison watched all of this unfold with mixed emotions. She was glad people were finally paying attention. She was glad Dr. Hayes was being held accountable. But she also felt the weight of what she had started. She had blown the whistle, and now the whole world was watching. She checked on Angela Thompson every day. Angela was still in the hospital, still in pain. When Dr. Morrison visited her, Angela thanked her quietly. She had heard that a resident had reported Dr. Hayes. She did not know for sure that it was Dr. Morrison, but she suspected. The gratitude in her eyes was all the confirmation Dr. Morrison needed, that she had done the right thing. But the story was far from over. The video had exposed Dr. Hayes, but now the real investigation was beginning. The hospital needed to figure out how deep the problem went. They needed to review his past cases. They needed to see if his racism had actually harmed patients. And what they were about to discover would be even worse than anyone imagined. The hospital moved quickly once the video went public. Within 24 hours, Dr. Hayes was suspended from all clinical duties pending a full investigation. He was told to turn in his badge and leave the building. Security escorted him out through a back entrance to avoid the news cameras that had gathered at the front doors. The hospital formed a special investigation team. It included the chief medical officer, the head of the ethics committee, 2 outside medical experts, and a representative from the state medical board. Their job was to review every case Dr. Hayes had handled over the past 5 years. They needed to determine if his prejudice had affected his medical decisions. They needed to know if patients had been harmed. The team set up in a large conference room on the administrative floor. They brought in boxes and boxes of medical records. Computer screens lined the walls displaying patient charts and test results. It was going to be a massive undertaking. Dr. Hayes had seen thousands of patients over the years. The team worked 12-hour days reviewing case after case looking for patterns. Meanwhile, the investigation into Angela Thompson's condition took an urgent turn. After Dr. Hayes was suspended, a new doctor was assigned to her case. Dr. James Martinez was a careful and thorough physician. He reviewed all of Angela's test results from the beginning. He examined her personally, and he did not like what he saw. The inflammation that Dr. Hayes had dismissed as minor was actually much worse than it appeared on the first scan. Dr. Martinez ordered a new CT scan immediately. What it showed made his stomach drop. Angela's appendix had ruptured. The infection had spread throughout her abdomen. She had peritonitis, a life-threatening condition. She needed emergency surgery, and she needed it now. Dr. Martinez rushed to Angela's room. She was barely conscious now, the infection raging through her body. Her temperature was dangerously high. Her blood pressure was dropping. He explained the situation to her quickly. "You have a ruptured appendix," he said, his voice urgent but calm. "We need to operate right away. If we don't, the infection could kill you." Angela was too weak to respond. She just nodded. Within minutes, she was being rushed to the operating room. The surgical team worked for 3 hours to clean out the infection and remove what was left of her appendix. It was touch and go. At one point, her blood pressure dropped so low that they almost lost her, but the surgeons kept working, and slowly they stabilized her. After the surgery, Dr. Martinez sat down and wrote a detailed report. He documented everything: the missed diagnosis, the delayed treatment, how Dr. Hayes had dismissed her symptoms without proper evaluation, how his bias had nearly cost Angela her life. The report went directly to the investigation team. When the investigators read Dr. Martinez's report, they realized this was not just about offensive comments. This was about medical negligence driven by racism. Dr. Hayes's prejudice had literally endangered a patient's life. They knew they needed to look even harder at his other cases. What they found over the next 2 weeks was shocking. The pattern was undeniable and consistent. When they compared how Dr. Hayes treated white patients versus patients of color, the differences were stark and disturbing. For pain management, the statistics were damning. White patients with similar symptoms received strong pain medication 70% of the time. Black patients received strong pain medication only 30% of the time. Instead, black patients were often given over-the-counter medications or told their pain was not that serious. The investigators found notes and charts where Dr. Hayes had written phrases like, "appears to be exaggerating," or possible drug-seeking behavior for black patients. Even when there was no evidence to support these claims, the diagnostic testing showed the same pattern. When white patients came in with concerning symptoms, Dr. Hayes ordered comprehensive tests: MRIs, specialized blood work, consultations with specialists. But for patients of color with the same symptoms, he often ordered only basic tests or no tests at all. He was more likely to tell them to go home and rest, or to suggest their problems were stress-related or psychosomatic. The investigators found case after case of misdiagnoses. A black man with chest pain had been told it was probably heartburn. He had a heart attack 2 days later. A Hispanic woman with severe headaches had been told she was just stressed from work. She had a brain aneurysm that went undetected for months. An Asian patient with abdominal pain had been told to try changing their diet. They had colon cancer that was not caught until it was stage 3. The referral patterns were equally troubling. Dr. Hayes was much less likely to refer patients of color to specialists. When white patients had complex conditions, he would quickly connect them with cardiologists, neurologists, or oncologists. But patients of color were often told to just follow up with their primary care doctor, even when their conditions clearly warranted specialist care. One particularly disturbing case involved a young black woman with lupus. She had been seeing Dr. Hayes for 2 years. Despite clear symptoms and positive test results, he had repeatedly told her that her symptoms were not that bad. He had not referred her to a rheumatologist. He had given her minimal medication. By the time another doctor finally diagnosed her properly, she had suffered permanent kidney damage that could have been prevented with proper treatment. The investigators interviewed nurses who had worked with Dr. Hayes. Many of them had stories to share, now that they felt safe to speak up. One nurse remembered how Dr. Hayes would roll his eyes when certain patients called for help. Another nurse recalled him saying that some patients were time wasters who should not be in the hospital. Several nurses described how he would spend 15 or 20 minutes with white patients but rush through appointments. With patients of color in 5 minutes or less on former, patients continued to come forward with their stories. The hospital set up a hotline for people to call if they felt they had received inadequate care from Dr. Hayes. The phone rang constantly. The stories were heartbreaking. A mother whose child's condition had been dismissed. An elderly man who had been made to feel like he was being silly for complaining about pain. A college student who had been accused of faking symptoms to get out of school. The investigation team brought in a medical statistician to analyze all the data. The results were published in a detailed report. The numbers did not lie. Patients of color under Dr. Hayes' care had worse outcomes than white patients. They had longer hospital stays, higher rates of complications, more emergency readmissions. The disparities were significant and could not be explained by any factor other than the difference in care they received. The team also discovered that there had been complaints about Dr. Hayes before. Over the years, several patients had filed grievances with the hospital. They had complained about feeling dismissed or disrespected, but each time, the administration had investigated and found insufficient evidence to take action. The complaints had been noted in his file, but nothing more. The hospital had protected him because of his reputation and his position. Now those old complaints took on new meaning. The investigators could see that this had been going on for years. The warning signs had been there, but no one had paid attention. Or maybe some people had paid attention but did not want to risk going up against such a powerful doctor. As news of the investigation's findings leaked to the media, the public outrage grew even stronger. People were not just angry about the video anymore. They were angry about the systematic harm Dr. Hayes had caused. They were angry that the hospital had not caught this sooner. They were angry that so many patients had suffered. Medical organizations began weighing in. The American Medical Association issued a statement condemning racial bias in healthcare. Medical schools started having discussions about how to better train doctors to recognize and eliminate their own biases. Some legislators even proposed new laws requiring implicit bias training for all healthcare providers. Back at Metropolitan General Hospital, the mood was somber. Doctors and nurses were grappling with difficult questions. How had this happened? How had no one stopped it sooner? What did this say about their institution? Some staff members felt guilty for not speaking up. Others felt betrayed by a colleague they had respected. Everyone felt the weight of the situation. Dr. Morrison was called to testify before the investigation committee. She told them everything she had witnessed that morning during rounds. She also shared other incidents she had noticed during her time working with Dr. Hayes. The committee thanked her for her courage in coming forward. They told her that her actions had likely saved Angela Thompson's life and would prevent other patients from being harmed in the future. Angela was recovering slowly in the hospital. The surgery had been successful, but she had a long road ahead. The infection had damaged some of her internal organs. She would need months of physical therapy. She would have medical bills that would take years to pay off, but she was alive. Dr. Martinez visited her often, apologizing on behalf of the hospital for what had happened. Angela accepted his apologies, but the trauma of the experience would stay with her forever. The investigation report was completed after 3 weeks of intensive work. It was over 200 pages long. The conclusions were clear and damning. Dr. Hayes had demonstrated a consistent pattern of racial bias in his medical practice over many years. This bias had resulted in substandard care for numerous patients of color. Multiple patients had suffered harm due to delayed diagnoses, inadequate treatment, or missed medical emergencies. The report recommended immediate termination of employment and referral to the state medical board for license revocation. The hospital administration held a press conference to announce the findings. The president of the hospital stood at a podium, looking exhausted and serious. She apologized to all the patients who had been harmed. She announced that Dr. Hayes would be terminated immediately. She outlined new policies the hospital would implement to prevent this from ever happening again. Mandatory bias training for all staff, a new patient advocacy program, an independent review board to investigate complaints, anonymous reporting systems for staff who witnessed concerning behavior. But for many people, these measures felt like too little, too late. The damage had been done. Patients had been hurt. Trust had been broken. And one question remained. What would happen to Dr. Hayes now? The termination came swiftly. 5 days after the investigation report was released, Dr. Richard Hayes received a certified letter at his home. It was short and direct. His employment at Metropolitan General Hospital was terminated effective immediately. He was barred from entering the premises. His access to all hospital systems was revoked. After 15 years, his career at the hospital was over in a single paragraph. But losing his job was just the beginning. The State Medical Board had already begun its own investigation. They had access to all the evidence the hospital had gathered. They conducted additional interviews with patients and staff. They reviewed medical literature about racial bias in healthcare. They consulted with ethics experts. And after 6 weeks of deliberation, they made their decision. The hearing was held in a large government building downtown. Dr. Hayes sat at a table with his lawyer, an expensive attorney who specialized in defending doctors. The medical board members sat at a long table facing him. There were 7 of them, all senior physicians and medical professionals. The room was packed with people. Journalists filled the back rows. Former patients sat in the middle sections, many of them there to witness justice finally being served. The board chairman, a white-haired doctor who had practiced medicine for 40 years, read the findings aloud. His voice was steady and serious. He went through each piece of evidence. The video that started it all, the investigation results, the pattern of discriminatory care, the patients who had been harmed. It took over an hour to go through everything. Dr. Hayes sat motionless. His face was blank, but his hands were clenched tightly on the table. His lawyer occasionally whispered something to him, but mostly they both just sat and listened. There was not much they could say. The evidence was overwhelming. When the chairman finished reading the findings, he paused. Then he delivered the verdict. Dr. Richard Hayes, this board finds that you have violated the fundamental principles of medical ethics. You have discriminated against patients based on their race. You have provided substandard care that resulted in harm. You have betrayed the trust that patients placed in you. Therefore, this board unanimously votes to revoke your medical license effective immediately. This revocation is permanent. You will not be eligible to reapply. Your career as a physician is over. The room erupted. Some people gasped. Others clapped. A few former patients cried tears of relief. Dr. Hayes stood up abruptly and walked out of the room without saying a word. His lawyer followed him, trying to talk about appeals, but they both knew the truth. It was over. No hospital would ever hire him again. No state would grant him a license. His career, his identity, his entire life as he knew it was finished. The lawsuits came next. Within weeks, 23 former patients filed civil suits against Dr. Hayes and Metropolitan General Hospital. They sought damages for medical negligence, emotional distress, and civil rights violations. The cases alleged that Dr. Hayes's racist treatment had caused delayed diagnoses, unnecessary suffering, and permanent health problems. Angela Thompson was among the plaintiffs. She filed one of the largest suits, seeking compensation for the ruptured appendix that had nearly killed her. Her lawyer argued that Dr. Hayes's bias had caused him to ignore clear warning signs of a medical emergency. The months of pain she had endured before finally being admitted to the hospital. The dismissive treatment when she arrived. The failure to properly diagnose her condition. The emergency surgery that could have been avoided with proper care. All of it documented. All of it undeniable. The hospital tried to settle the cases quietly. They did not want the publicity of drawn-out trials. They offered money to the plaintiffs along with non-disclosure agreements. But most of the patients refused. They did not just want money. They wanted their stories heard. They wanted the world to know what had happened to them, so the cases went to trial. The media coverage was intense. Every day of the trials, reporters filled the courtroom. The stories that emerged were heartbreaking. Patients testified about being dismissed and disrespected, about pain that went untreated, about serious conditions that went undiagnosed, about feeling worthless and invisible in a place where they had gone seeking help. One man testified about chest pains that Dr. Hayes had dismissed as anxiety. He had gone home and suffered a massive heart attack 2 days later. He survived, but he had permanent heart damage now. He could no longer work. His life had been completely changed because Dr. Hayes had not taken him seriously. A woman testified about severe headaches that Dr. Hayes had said were just stress. She later discovered she had a brain tumor. By the time it was properly diagnosed, it had grown too large to be fully removed. She would live with the effects for the rest of her life. She broke down crying on the witness stand. describing how Dr. Hayes had made her feel like she was being dramatic, like her pain was not real. The jury heard all of these stories. They saw the medical record showing the disparities in care. They watched the video of Dr. Hayes mocking Angela Thompson. They listened to expert witnesses explain how racial bias in healthcare led to worse outcomes for patients of color. And when it came time to deliberate, they did not take long to reach their verdicts. Case after case, the juries found in favor of the patients. They awarded millions of dollars in damages. The hospital's insurance company paid most of the claims, but the hospital itself took a massive financial hit. More importantly, their reputation was severely damaged. For years afterward, people would remember Metropolitan General as the hospital where a racist doctor had practiced for years without being stopped. Dr. Hayes faced financial ruin. The lawsuits drained his savings. He had to sell his house, his car, most of his possessions. He tried to file for bankruptcy, but many of the judgments against him could not be discharged. He would be paying off debts for the rest of his life. His name became toxic. When people searched for him online, the first thing that came up was the video. News articles about his license revocation, stories from his victims. He could not escape it. He tried moving to a different state, but the internet followed him everywhere. He tried working in non-medical fields, but employers would Google his name and refuse to hire him. He had become a pariah. The professional consequences extended beyond just him. The medical board started investigating other doctors at Metropolitan General. They wanted to know how such systematic discrimination had gone unnoticed for so long. Several other physicians faced disciplinary action for failing to report concerns about Dr. Hayes' conduct. The hospital's administration was overhauled. The president resigned. The chief medical officer was demoted. New leadership came in with a mandate to restore trust and implement real reforms. Meanwhile, Angela Thompson was healing. The surgery had saved her life, but the recovery was long and difficult. She spent weeks in the hospital and months in physical therapy. She had to take a leave of absence from her teaching job. The medical bills were enormous, though the settlement from her lawsuit helped cover most of them. But money could not heal everything. Angela suffered from post-traumatic stress. She had nightmares about lying in that hospital bed, hearing Dr. Hayes mock her in the hallway. She developed anxiety about seeing doctors. Even going to routine appointments made her panic. She started therapy to work through the trauma. Slowly, with help, she began to rebuild her sense of trust. She also found a new purpose. Angela became an advocate for patients' rights and healthcare equity. She spoke at medical schools about her experience. She talked about what it felt like to be dismissed and dehumanized by someone who was supposed to help her. She urged future doctors to examine their own biases and to always treat patients with dignity and respect. Her speeches were powerful and moving. Medical students told her that her story changed how they thought about patient care. Dr. Keisha Morrison, the resident who had blown the whistle, faced her own challenges. Some of her colleagues praised her courage. Others accused her of being a troublemaker. Some said she had ruined Dr. Hayes' life over one mistake. She received hate mail and threatening messages online, but she also received messages of support from patients and fellow healthcare workers who thanked her for standing up. She completed her residency and went on to become an attending physician at a different hospital. She specialized in internal medicine just like Dr. Hayes had, but she practiced it very differently. She listened to her patients. She believed them when they described their pain. She treated everyone with respect, regardless of their race or background. She became the kind of doctor that Dr. Hayes should have been. Metropolitan General Hospital implemented the reforms they had promised. All staff members were required to complete implicit bias training every year. They created a patient advocacy office where people could report concerns about their care. They established an independent review board to investigate complaints. They diversified their leadership team, bringing in more people of color to positions of power. The changes helped, but rebuilding trust took time. Some patients refused to go to Metropolitan General anymore. Their confidence in the institution shattered. Others gave the hospital a second chance, hopeful that real change was happening. Community organizations monitored the hospital's progress, making sure the reforms were more than just words on paper. National medical organizations used the case as a wake-up call. Studies were commissioned to examine racial disparities in healthcare more broadly. Training programs were developed to help doctors recognize and combat their own biases. Medical school curricula were revised to include more education about cultural competency and health equity. The conversation about racism in medicine, which had been happening quietly in academic circles, suddenly became mainstream. Years passed. The scandal faded from daily headlines, though it was never forgotten. Dr. Hayes became a cautionary tale told in medical ethics classes. His case was studied as an example of how prejudice and power can combine to create devastating harm. His name was spoken as a warning. This is what happens when doctors let bias override their duty to care. Angela Thompson lived to see her daughter graduate from high school and her son finish college. She returned to teaching, finding joy again in working with children. She still had moments when the trauma resurfaced, but she had learned to manage it. She found meaning in her advocacy work, knowing that by sharing her story, she was helping to protect other patients from similar harm. The former residents and interns who had been there that morning during rounds went on to become doctors throughout the country. Many of them said that witnessing that incident shaped their entire approach to medicine. They promised themselves they would never be like Dr. Hayes. They would never mock a patient. They would never let prejudice influence their care. They would speak up when they saw wrong being done, just as Dr. Morrison had. The hospital room where Angela had lain, hearing herself being mocked, was eventually renovated and assigned to new patients. The hallway where Dr. Hayes had stood, performing his cruel impression, saw thousands more rounds by different doctors teaching different lessons. The building remained, but everything about what happened inside it had changed. Dr. Richard Hayes lived out his remaining years in obscurity. He never practiced medicine again. He never apologized publicly for what he had done. He gave one brief interview years later, insisting that he had been misunderstood, that political correctness had destroyed his career. The interviewer asked him if he had any regrets. He said he regretted ever doing rounds that morning, but he never said he regretted his actions or his beliefs. He never acknowledged the harm he had caused. In the end, his legacy was not his published papers or his 15 years of service. It was the pain he inflicted, the patients he failed, the lives he damaged with his prejudice. His career ended not with honor but with disgrace. And perhaps that was the most fitting conclusion to the story of a doctor who had forgotten the most basic principle of medicine. First, do no harm. The story of what happened at Metropolitan General Hospital became a turning point in conversations about healthcare equity. It showed that racism in medicine was not just a historical problem or an abstract concept. It was real. It was happening. It was causing measurable harm, and it needed to stop. Change came slowly, but it came. More diverse voices entered the medical field. More patients felt empowered to advocate for themselves. More doctors examined their own biases. The work of creating a truly equitable healthcare system continued, one patient, one doctor, one hospital at a time. And it all started with one resident who decided that staying silent was not an option, and one patient who survived to tell her story. Dr. Keisha Morrison, the resident who had blown the whistle, faced her own challenges. Some of her colleagues praised her courage. Others accused her of being a troublemaker. Some said she had ruined Dr. Hayes' life over one mistake. She received hate mail and threatening messages online, but she also received messages of support from patients and fellow healthcare workers who thanked her for standing up. She completed her residency and went on to become an attending physician at a different hospital. She specialized in internal medicine just like Dr. Hayes had, but she practiced it very differently. She listened to her patients. She believed them when they described their pain. She treated everyone with respect, regardless of their race or background. She became the kind of doctor that Dr. Hayes should have been. Metropolitan General Hospital implemented the reforms they had promised. All staff members were required to complete implicit bias training every year. They created a patient advocacy office where people could report concerns about their care. They established an independent review board to investigate complaints. They diversified their leadership team, bringing in more people of color to positions of power. The changes helped, but rebuilding trust took time. Some patients refused to go to Metropolitan General anymore. Their confidence in the institution shattered. Others gave the hospital a second chance, hopeful that real change was happening. Community organizations monitored the hospital's progress, making sure the reforms were more than just words on paper. National medical organizations used the case as a wake-up call. Studies were commissioned to examine racial disparities in healthcare more broadly. Training programs were developed to help doctors recognize and combat their own biases. Medical school curricula were revised to include more education about cultural competency and health equity. The conversation about racism in medicine, which had been happening quietly in academic circles, suddenly became mainstream. Years passed. The scandal faded from daily headlines, though it was never forgotten. Dr. Hayes became a cautionary tale told in medical ethics classes. His case was studied as an example of how prejudice and power can combine to create devastating harm. His name was spoken as a warning. This is what happens when doctors let bias override their duty to care. Angela Thompson lived to see her daughter graduate from high school and her son finish college. She returned to teaching, finding joy again in working with children. She still had moments when the trauma resurfaced, but she had learned to manage it. She found meaning in her advocacy work, knowing that by sharing her story, she was helping to protect other patients from similar harm. The former residents and interns who had been there that morning during rounds went on to become doctors throughout the country. Many of them said that witnessing that incident shaped their entire approach to medicine. They promised themselves they would never be like Dr. Hayes. They would never mock a patient. They would never let prejudice influence their care. They would speak up when they saw wrong being done, just as Dr. Morrison had. The hospital room where Angela had lain, hearing herself being mocked, was eventually renovated and assigned to new patients. The hallway where Dr. Hayes had stood, performing his cruel impression, saw thousands more rounds by different doctors teaching different lessons. The building remained, but everything about what happened inside it had changed. Dr. Richard Hayes lived out his remaining years in obscurity. He never practiced medicine again. He never apologized publicly for what he had done. He gave one brief interview years later, insisting that he had been misunderstood, that political correctness had destroyed his career. The interviewer asked him if he had any regrets. He said he regretted ever doing rounds that morning, but he never said he regretted his actions or his beliefs. He never acknowledged the harm he had caused. In the end, his legacy was not his published papers or his 15 years of service. It was the pain he inflicted, the patients he failed, the lives he damaged with his prejudice. His career ended not with honor but with disgrace. And perhaps that was the most fitting conclusion to the story of a doctor who had forgotten the most basic principle of medicine. First, do no harm. The story of what happened at Metropolitan General Hospital became a turning point in conversations about healthcare equity. It showed that racism in medicine was not just a historical problem or an abstract concept. It was real. It was happening. It was causing measurable harm, and it needed to stop. Change came slowly, but it came. More diverse voices entered the medical field. More patients felt empowered to advocate for themselves. More doctors examined their own biases. The work of creating a truly equitable healthcare system continued, one patient, one doctor, one hospital at a time. And it all started with one resident who decided that staying silent was not an option, and one patient who survived to tell her story.